On a sun-scorched trail in the American frontier, a fatal mistake is about to turn deadly. When the notorious Carson gang encounters a lone rider, they see him as nothing more than another soft settler, unfit for the harsh realities of the West. Their laughter echoes across the empty plains as they leave him beaten and horseless in the dust. But their mockery will soon turn to terror. What they don't know is that this helpless wanderer belongs to the legendary McKenna clan, a family of ruthless outlaw hunters whose very name makes hardened killers tremble. For generations, they've tracked down the West's most dangerous men, and they've never left a score unsettled. This isn't just another tale of frontier justice. This is the story of how the most feared gang west of the Mississippi learned that some family legacies are written in blood. As darkness falls across the territory, these outlaws are about to discover the ancient truth every predator fears. Sometimes the prey you mock becomes the hunter that stalks you. One by one, they'll learn why the McKenna name has haunted outlaw dreams for decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty trail as James McKenna guided his horse through the winding path between towering red rock formations. His weathered duster carried the dust of 1,000 miles, and the well-worn Winchester in his saddle scabbard spoke of journeys better left untold. To any passing stranger, he appeared no different from the countless drifters who roam these territories, just another soul seeking his fortune in the vast expanse of the American frontier. The horse's hooves kicked up small clouds with each step, marking their progress through the desolate landscape. James adjusted his worn leather hat, shielding his eyes from the harsh glare as he surveyed the horizon. 20 years of tracking had taught him to read the land like others read books, and today it told him he wasn't alone. Small signs, displaced, rocks, broken twigs, the unnatural silence of desert birds, all pointed to recent activity along this seldom-used trail. In his saddlebags, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, lay a collection of wanted posters. Each bore the face of a member of the Carson gang, their crimes listed in neat print below mugshots taken in various frontier towns. James had been tracking them for 3 weeks now, following a trail of robbery and murder that stretched from the Colorado Territory to these sun-baked lands. But James wasn't hunting them, not yet. He was scouting, gathering information like his father had taught him all those years ago. "Knowledge before action," the old man would say, his voice carrying the weight of generations of experience. A McKenna strikes once and strikes true. The family motto wasn't just words. It was a methodology that had earned them their fearsome reputation among the lawless breed that plagued these territories. His horse nickered softly, picking up on something in the wind. James let his hand rest casually near his holstered Colt, his fingers brushing the worn grip that had become smooth as silk from years of use. The weapon, like everything about him, told a story, if you knew how to read it. The intricate Celtic knotwork carved into the handle marked it as a McKenna piece, one of the many weapons his grandfather had commissioned when the family first took up their calling. The sun climbed higher as James continued his journey, his thoughts drifting to the telegram he'd received 2 days ago, reports of the Carson gang growing bolder, more vicious. Their latest raid had left an entire homestead in ashes, a family of settlers murdered for the crime of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The law couldn't touch them, wouldn't touch them, some whispered, suggesting the local sheriffs. Pockets might be lined with blood money, but that's why the McKennas existed. When the law failed, when justice turned a blind eye, they were there to restore balance. It wasn't about revenge, though plenty had called them revenge killers over the years. It was about maintaining order in a land that teetered constantly on the edge of chaos. His father had explained it to him when he was just a boy, watching his first manhunt preparation. "We're not executioners, son. We're gardeners, pulling weeds before they can choke the whole garden." James pulled up his horse at a small rise, taking a long drink from his canteen as he studied the valley below. In the distance, he could make out the faint outline of Tucker's Crossing, a small settlement that had sprung up around a reliable water source. The Carson gang had been spotted there 3 days ago, and if his calculations were correct, they hadn't strayed far. Men like that always needed somewhere to spend their ill-gotten gains. The weight of his family's legacy rode with him, though it sat lighter than most would expect. The McKennas had been hunting bad men since before the West was won, their methods passed down from father to son, mother to daughter, each generation adding its own wisdom to the family's considerable knowledge. James carried that wisdom in every careful step, every measured decision. As he urged his horse forward again, he felt the familiar sense of certainty settling over him. The Carson gang's days were numbered. They just didn't know it yet. Whether it took days or weeks, the outcome was already written. No one who earned the focused attention of a McKenna ever rode free for long. Tucker's Crossing had seen better days. The once bustling trading post had dwindled to a handful of determined settlers and a saloon that served more as a haven for outlaws than a gathering place for honest folk. Today, the Carson gang had claimed it as their own, their horses crowding the hitching posts while their raucous laughter spilled out onto the dusty street. Marcus Carson sat at his usual table in the corner, a position that gave him a clear view of both the batwing doors and the back exit. His scarred face told the story of a dozen gunfights, and the notches on his gun belt spoke of battles won at any cost. Around him, his men sprawled across tables and chairs, counting their latest take from the Henderson Ranch raid. "Them settlers sure did squeal," drawled Tom Reeves, Carson's right-hand man, as he cleaned blood from his knife, "especially that fancy one with the pocket watch." He tossed the golden timepiece onto the table, where it landed with a dull thud among the scattered. Playing cards, Carson's cold eyes flickered over the spoils. Under his leadership, the gang had grown from common thieves to something far more dangerous. 12 men strong now, each chosen for their particular brand of cruelty. They weren't just robbers anymore. They were a force that made even territorial marshals think twice before giving pursuit. "Boys," Carson's voice cut through the chatter, carrying the authority that had kept him alive and in charge for 15 years. "We're moving out at first light. Word is, the marshals gathered a posse in Silver Creek." He didn't mention the rumors. He'd heard whispers of concerned citizens sending telegrams east. Carson didn't believe in ghosts or legends, but he'd learned to stay ahead of trouble. The gang had developed a system that worked. Strike hard, move fast, and leave no witnesses to carry tales to the law. Their reputation for brutality ensured that most folks were too terrified to stand against them. Those few who did ended up as object lessons, their fate serving as warnings to others who might consider resistance. What about that new bank in Millbrook? This from Snake-Eye Jenkins, whose aim with a rifle was as legendary as his capacity for whiskey. Heard they just got a shipment of payroll for their mining operations. Carson leaned back, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. "Patience, boys. Let's let the dust settle from the Henderson job. Besides," a cruel smile twisted his features, "we got enough here to enjoy ourselves for a while." The gang's laughter was interrupted by the saloon doors creaking open. Conversation died as a stranger walked in, trail dust coating his duster, his movements measured and calm. Carson's hand instinctively moved closer to his gun as his eyes assessed the newcomer. Something about the man's bearing set off warning bells, though he couldn't say exactly why. "Well, well," Reeves called out, already half drunk and looking for entertainment. "Looks like we got ourselves some fresh meat, boys." The gang's laughter held an edge of menace that had made braver men turn and flee, but the stranger just moved to the bar, ordered his drink, and paid no mind to the predatory gazes following his every move. It was the kind of confidence that could either mark a man as dangerous or foolish, and in Carson's experience, there weren't many dangerous men left who hadn't already heard of his gang. "I don't like it," muttered Snake Eye, his good eye narrowing. "Something ain't right about him." Carson studied the stranger for a moment longer before making his decision. In his line of work, paranoia was a survival trait. "Then let's find out what his story is. Reeves, why don't you and the boys show our new friend some proper tuckers?" Crossing hospitality. As his men rose with dark chuckles and meaningful looks, Carson remained seated, watching. He'd built his reputation on never leaving loose ends, never taking unnecessary risks. One way or another, they'd find out if this stranger was going to be a problem, and if he was, well, there was always room for one more shallow grave in the desert. The whiskey at Tucker's Crossing tasted like turpentine, but James sipped it anyway, his back to the bar, every sense alert despite his relaxed posture. In the grimy mirror behind the bottles, he watched the reflection of Tom Reeves and 3 others approaching, their intentions as clear as the gun belt slung low on their hips. "Ain't seen you round these parts before, friend." Reeves's voice dripped with false hospitality. The gang members spread out, creating a half-circle around James. Their practiced movements spoke of countless similar confrontations, none of which had likely ended well for the lonely traveler they'd cornered. James set his glass down slowly, just passing through, each word measured, careful, not showing fear, but not yet revealing the steel beneath his calm exterior. His eyes met Reeves in the mirror, noting the yellow-toothed grin spreading across the outlaw's face. Passing through, he says. Reeves looked at his companions, encouraging their laughter. "Well now, that's going to be a mite difficult without a horse. Boys, I do believe I just decided to buy myself a new mount." His hand dropped to his gun belt, thumb hooking casually over the buckle. James turned, his movement unhurried. "Horse isn't for sale." He kept his hands visible, away from his weapons, not out of fear, but because he wasn't ready. Not yet. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Let them show their hand first. Let their own arrogance be their undoing. The first punch came from the left, a crude haymaker that James could have dodged. Instead, he took it, letting his body roll with the impact. As he staggered, rough hands grabbed his arms. The next few minutes were a blur of pain and calculated restraint as the gang worked him over, their laughter mixing with the dull thuds of fists against flesh. Through it all, James remained silent. He memorized each face, each voice, each distinctive movement. Even as they dragged him outside into the harsh sunlight, he was gathering intelligence, learning their patterns, filing away details that would prove useful later. Marcus Carson emerged from the saloon, walking down the steps with the deliberate pace of a man used to commanding attention. His scarred face showed no emotion as he surveyed the scene. "Found yourself some trouble, stranger?" Blood trickled from James's split lip as he looked up at Carson. Their eyes met, and for just a moment, something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, of what was to come. But Carson couldn't know what he was setting in motion. "Nice horse you got there," Carson continued, running a hand along the flank of James's mount. "Too nice for the likes of you. Boys, why don't you show our friend here how we treat trespassers in Tucker's Crossing?" What followed was methodical, brutal. They took his guns first. The Winchester from his saddle, the Colt from his holster, then his horse, his supplies, everything but the clothes on his back. Each item was accompanied by another blow, another casual demonstration of their power over life and death in this remote corner of the territory. "Leave him walking," Carson ordered finally, already losing interest. "Maybe next time he'll think twice about which saloons he drinks in." The gang mounted up, James's horse now bearing their stolen supplies. Their laughter carried back on the wind as they rode away, leaving him in the dust. James pushed himself to his knees, then his feet. He spat blood onto the sun-baked earth and watched the gang disappear into the heat haze. They had taken his weapons, but not the one that mattered most, the small medallion sewn into his coat collar, stamped with the McKenna family crest. Within it, a tiny compartment held what he needed, a message already written, waiting only for the right moment. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, James began walking. His steps were steady despite his injuries. The Carson gang had just made the last mistake of their lives. They just didn't know it yet. By sundown, a telegraph would be sent. By tomorrow, the first of his family would be riding. And after that, the real hunt would begin. The desert sun showed no mercy as James McKenna made his way across the barren landscape. Each step was measured, deliberate, his boots leaving a steady trail in the dusty earth. Blood had dried on his face, his ribs ached with every breath, but his eyes remained fixed on the horizon. The Carson gang had left him to die in this wasteland, a mistake they would live to regret, but not for long. A mile out from Tucker's Crossing, James paused in the shadow of a towering rock formation. His hands, steady despite the beating they'd taken, reached for the medallion sewn into his collar. The metal disc came free with a practiced twist, its face bearing the worn Celtic knots of the McKenna crest. Another twist revealed the hollow interior, where a tightly folded paper and a small brass key lay hidden. A McKenna is never unarmed, his grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. Not as long as he has his wits and his family. The old man had designed these medallions himself, ensuring every family member carried one. They weren't just symbols, they were survival tools, insurance against exactly this type of situation. James moved deeper into the shadows of the rocks, finding a small crevice that offered shelter from both sun and prying eyes. From a hidden pocket in his boot, he withdrew a small leather pouch, waterproof and sealed. Inside lay dried meat, a few matches, and a small canteen. Emergency supplies that the Carson gang hadn't thought to look for. Amateur mistakes from men who thought themselves professionals at violence. As he took a careful drink from the canteen, James began cataloging everything he'd learned. 12 men in total. Carson, the leader, scarred face and calculating eyes. Reeves, his right hand, quick to violence but sloppy with drink. Snake-Eye Jenkins, the sharpshooter. Each face, each name, each detail filed away with the precision of a man who had spent his life studying his prey. The beating had served its purpose, though the gang would never understand how. In their arrogance, they'd revealed their dynamics, their hierarchies, their weaknesses. He'd seen how they moved, how they thought, how they operated as a unit. More importantly, he'd seen the fear in their eyes when Carson spoke, fear that would soon turn to terror when they realized what they'd awakened. His fingers traced the bruises on his ribs, checking for breaks. Nothing serious. They'd been too focused on humiliation rather than real damage. Another mistake. If they'd killed him outright, they might have bought themselves a few more days of life. Instead, they'd given him exactly what he needed, a reason to bring the full weight of the McKenna family down on their heads. The sun was past its peak when James finally moved from his shelter, his course set for the small way station he knew. Lay 10 miles east, his pace was unhurried but relentless. Each step took him closer to the first phase of a hunt that had become inevitable the moment the Carson gang laid hands on him. In his mind, he was already composing the message that would bring his family riding, not a call for help. The McKennas didn't think in those terms. This would be an invitation, a summoning to the kind of work they'd been born and bred for. The kind of work that would remind the territory why their name was whispered around campfires with equal measures of awe and dread. The desert stretched endless before him, but James McKenna's lips curved in a slight smile despite his split lip. The Carson gang thought they'd left him with nothing. In truth, they'd given him everything he needed: targets, intelligence, and justification. Now all that remained was to spring the trap and watch as the hunters became the hunted. The Copper Creek way station emerged from the heat haze like a mirage, a weathered wooden building standing defiant against the desert's attempts to reclaim it. James McKenna's boots left dusty prints on the worn planks of its porch as he approached the door. Inside, the station keeper, an elderly man named Dawson, looked up from his telegraph key with rheumy eyes that sharpened at the sight of James's battered face. "Lord Almighty, son, you look like you've been dragged behind a horse." James eased himself onto a chair near the telegraph. "Need to send a message, Mr. Dawson. Private wire." He placed a gold coin on the counter, far more than the service was worth. Dawson's eyebrows rose, but he asked no questions as he reached for a fresh message form. The medallion's key fit perfectly into the station's private wire lock, a system the McKennas had arranged years ago with telegraph offices across the territory. James's fingers moved deliberately across the paper, writing in a code older than he was. "Family gathering required. Carson party of 12. Tucker's territory. Preparations complete. Bring the good silver." To anyone else, it might have read like an innocuous invitation to dinner, but to the McKennas, each word carried specific meaning. The number of targets, their location, the stage of preparation, and the good silver, the signal that this wasn't just a hunt, but a reckoning. As Dawson's key clicked out the message, James remembered the first time he'd seen this code in action. He'd been 14, watching his father compose a similar message after tracking a gang of rustlers into Mexico. Within days, 3 of his uncles had arrived, each bringing their own unique skills to the hunt. The rustlers never saw them coming. "Message is sent," Dawson announced, sliding the confirmation across the counter. "Response paid for." James nodded, settling in to wait. He didn't have to wait long. The telegraph's sharp clicks filled the quiet station within minutes. Dawson's pencil scratched across paper, recording the incoming messages. "North party moving, 2 days. Uncle Samuel. East team acknowledged. Dawn rider tomorrow. Thomas. Southwest covered. Sisters en route. Sarah." Each response brought a slight nod from James. Samuel, the tracker whose skills in the wilderness bordered on supernatural. Thomas, whose skill with explosives had ended more than one siege. And Sarah, his youngest aunt, whose ability to move unseen had become legend among those who survived long enough to tell tales. But it was the final message that brought the ghost of a smile to his split lip. "The old wolf rides. Night's coming." Father Dawson handed over the transcribed messages, which James immediately fed into the station's small stove. As the papers curled and blackened in the flames, he felt the familiar calm settling over him. Everything was in motion now. The McKennas were coming, drawn to the hunt like wolves to a blood trail. "Might want to avoid Tucker's Crossing for a spell," James told Dawson as he rose to leave. "Weather's about to turn bad out that way." The old man's knowing look suggested he'd seen enough in his years manning the telegraph to understand what kind of storm was brewing. "Reckon I'll button up tight then. Shame about them Carson boys, though." At James's questioning glance, he shrugged. "Man doesn't work a telegraph this long without learning to read between the lines, son, and I ain't shed tears over any of their kind yet." James stepped back into the harsh sunlight, his path taking him toward a small ranch where a trusted friend would lend him a horse. By this time tomorrow, the first of his family would arrive. Within 3 days, they'd all be here, their net drawing tight around the Carson gang. The hunt was on, and this time there would be no mercy. Smoke from a small campfire curled into the darkening sky as James tended the flames. He'd chosen his position carefully, a natural bowl in the highlands overlooking Tucker's Crossing, sheltered from view, but with clear sightlines in all directions. The borrowed horse grazed nearby, its ears occasionally flicking at sounds too faint for human hearing. The first arrival came as twilight painted the desert in shades of purple and gold. A horse and rider materialized from the shadows like a ghost, moving with the silent grace that marked Sarah McKenna's approach. James's youngest aunt dismounted without a sound, her dark clothes and painted face making her nearly invisible in the growing darkness. "Nephew." She moved to the fire, her smile visible only in her eyes. "You look like hell." "Should see the other guys," James replied, accepting her brief embrace. Sarah's fingers ghosted over his injuries, cataloguing them with professional interest. "Oh, we will." Her voice carried the promise of retribution. "Samuel's about an hour behind me. He's been reading the sign you left. Says you did good work despite your condition." The mention of his uncle's tracking skills brought a nod of satisfaction. Every stumble, every drop of blood James had left on his walk from Tucker's Crossing had been deliberate, signs that only a McKenna would know how to read, telling the story of what had happened and what was yet to come. As the stars began to emerge, more shapes appeared from the darkness. Samuel arrived next, his weathered face nearly as dark as the night itself from decades spent in the wilderness. He carried his famous rifle, the one their grandfather had commissioned from a German gunsmith, its scope custom ground for night shooting. "Gang's still in town," Samuel reported, settling by the fire. "Getting loud, celebrating their latest victory." His lip curled in disgust. "Sloppy, overconfident. They've lost whatever edge they might have had." Sarah laid out a map she'd drawn on heavy parchment, weighted with stones at the corners. "Town's changed some since we were last here. New buildings on the north side. Old liveries burned down, but the basic layout's the same." Their quiet discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Thomas, who appeared leading a pack mule loaded with his specialized equipment. The former Union sapper had turned his wartime demolitions experience into an art form, creating tools that had ended more than one siege during the family's long history of hunting. "Found some interesting approaches while I was scouting," Thomas announced, unlashing his packs. "That new silver mine they abandoned last year, tunnels run right under the edge of town, could be useful." As the night deepened, James listened to his family members exchange information and ideas, each bringing their particular expertise to the developing plan. This was the McKenna legacy in action, not just the hunting, but the methodical preparation that preceded it. Every detail mattered, every angle was considered, every contingency planned for. The last arrival came near midnight. Alexander McKenna, James's father, rode into the firelight like a figure from an old legend. His silver hair gleamed, and the twin colts at his hips had taken more lives than most territorial marshals saw in their entire careers. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, pale blue and sharp as winter ice, missing nothing as they surveyed the camp. "Tell me everything," he said, settling beside his son. And James did, recounting every detail of his encounter with the Carson gang. His father listened without interruption, those pale eyes growing colder with each word. When James finished, Alexander was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "You know why we do this, son? Why our family has always done this?" "To maintain order," James began, but his father shook his head. "That's the result, not the reason. We do this because there must be a line, a final boundary that men like Carson can't cross without consequence. The law has its place, but some men think themselves beyond its reach. They need to know that there's something else out there, something that doesn't wear a badge or answer to a judge, something that never stops, never sleeps, never shows mercy once the hunt begins." Around the fire, heads nodded in agreement. This was the true McKenna legacy. Not just justice, but inevitability. The certainty that no matter how far evil men ran, no matter how well they hid, the family would find them. Dawn was still hours away, but already the plan was taking shape. The Carson gang had sealed their fate the moment they'd chosen to prey on a lone rider. Now, as the McKennas gathered in the darkness, that fate was drawing near. First light found the McKennas spread across the ridgeline above Tucker's Crossing, each positioned to observe the town from a different angle. Through Samuel's brass spyglass, James watched the Carson gang's morning routine unfold. They'd posted guards, smarter than he'd expected, but the men were tired, sluggish from the previous night's celebration. 3 men on rotation, Sarah murmured, materializing beside him like a shadow. She'd spent the night ghosting through town, mapping patrol routes and listening to drunken conversations. They're nervous, James. Words reach them about other gangs going missing up north. They don't know it was us, but they feel something's coming. James handed the spyglass back to Samuel. Good. Fear makes men sloppy. He turned to where his father and Thomas were bent over Sarah's map, their fingers tracing possible approaches. What's the verdict? Alexander straightened, his pale eyes reflecting the rising sun. We do this in stages. First, we isolate them. Sarah's confirmed they're planning to hit the Millbrook Bank next week. That gives us time to cut off their escape routes, turn this town into a trap. He nodded to Thomas. Show him. Thomas unrolled a second map, this one showing the surrounding territory. Red marks indicated key points where the Carson gang might try to flee once the hunting began. I've got enough charges to bring down these 3 passes, he explained, pointing. Once those are blocked, there's only 2 ways out of the valley. Samuel will cover the north trail from that ridgeline, and your father's taking the south. What about the mine tunnels? James asked, remembering Thomas's discovery from the night before. A slow smile spread across his uncle's weathered face. Already rigged. If they try to use them, one pull of a wire brings the whole network down. They'll either be buried or driven right back into our arms. Sarah spread out a detailed sketch of the town itself, annotations marking guard positions and routine movements. They're creatures of habit, she reported. Carson takes his meals at the same time every day, always sits with his back to the same wall. Reeves spends his afternoons with the saloon girl, 3rd floor, west side. Snake-Eye Jenkins likes to show off his shooting from the hotel balcony every sunset. Predictable, Samuel grunted. That's good. Gives us clean shots once the time. I comes. But Alexander shook his head. No long-range kills, not this time. His voice carried the kind of authority that made even experienced killers pause. These men laid hands on my son. They need to understand what that means before they die. James felt the weight of his father's words. The McKennas were known for their efficiency, their clean kills from impossible distances. This would be different. This would be personal. We'll take them one at a time, Alexander continued, outlining the strategy. Create confusion. Make them turn on each other. Samuel, I want you moving their horses tomorrow night, just enough to make them suspect each other of planning to run. Sarah, spread some whispers about Carson holding out gold from the last. Your job, Thomas. Make sure those charges are ready. The sound of distant explosions should add to their paranoia. The plan took shape as the sun climbed higher. Each family member adding their expertise, suggesting refinements, identifying potential problems and solutions. This was the McKenna way, methodical, thorough, leaving nothing to chance. What about the townspeople? James asked, thinking. Of the telegraph operator and others who'd shown him kindness. Already handled, Sarah replied. I spent the night spreading word. Anyone with sense will be gone by tomorrow evening. The rest, she shrugged. They've made their choice living under Carson's shadow. Alexander stood, brushing dust from his clothes. We start at sundown. James, you'll make the first move. Let them see you in town alive. Let that seed of doubt begin to grow. His cold smile promised retribution. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late to run. The family dispersed to their assigned positions, each carrying a piece of the plan. As James watched them go, he remembered the Carson gang's laughter as they'd beaten him. Their certainty that he was just another helpless drifter. That laughter would soon turn to screams as the hunters became the hunted. The trap was set. Now it was time to watch it close. Dusk painted Tucker's Crossing in shades of blood and gold as James McKenna walked down its main street. He'd cleaned himself up, but the bruises on his face remained visible, a deliberate reminder of the gang's handiwork. Townsfolk stopped and stared, some backing away into doorways, others hurrying to spread the word. The dead man was walking. Inside the saloon, conversation died as James pushed through the batwing doors. Billy Carson, the youngest of Marcus's brothers, was the first to spot him. The boy's face went white as chalk, his trembling hand knocking over a whiskey glass. The sound of breaking glass drew every eye in the room. "Evening, gentlemen." James's voice carried easily in the sudden silence. He moved to the bar, every step measured and calm. "I believe you have something of mine." The bartender, caught between fear of the Carsons and the ghost before him, fumbled with a bottle. 3 of Carson's men reached for their guns, but uncertainty stayed their hands. They'd watched this man take a beating without resistance. His calm return made no sense. From his position on the balcony, Snake-Eye Jenkins narrowed his good eye. "Shoulda kept walking, boy. Ain't no law out here gonna help you." "Who said anything about the law?" James turned, letting them all see his face clearly in the fading light. Something in his eyes made hardened killers look away. He lifted his glass in a mock toast. "To family." As if on cue, a distant explosion shook the windows. Then another and another, the sound of mountain passes being sealed by Thomas's carefully placed charges. Billy Carson bolted for the door, only to return moments later, his young face twisted with panic. "The horses," he stammered. "Half. The horses are gone." Samuel's work, done with the silent skill that had made him legendary among trackers. The gang's escape routes were disappearing one by one, though they didn't yet understand the significance. James finished his drink and set the glass down carefully. "Sounds like you boys have some troubles to sort out. Might want to count your gold too, assuming everyone's been honest about their share." Sarah's whispered rumors were already bearing fruit. 2 of the gang members exchanged suspicious glances, remembering conversations about missing money from the last raid. The seeds of doubt had been planted. "Shoot him!" Snake-Eye's voice cracked with tension. "What are you waiting for?" But James was already moving, sliding past the batwing doors into the gathering darkness. Gunshots followed, splintering wood and shattering glass, wild, panicked shooting that hit nothing but air. Outside, chaos was spreading through the town. More explosions in the distance, the sound echoing off canyon walls, horses whinnying in terror. And through it all, James walked calmly down the street, every step deliberate. Behind him, he could hear the gang's shouts turning to arguments. From her hidden position on the roof, Sarah watched the confusion unfold. Her whispered words into carefully chosen ears had done their work. The gang was already fracturing, trust crumbling like the sealed mountain passes that had once promised escape. "First blood drawn," she murmured into the growing dark. "No bullets needed." James made his way to the agreed meeting point where his father waited in the shadows. Alexander's pale eyes gleamed with approval as his son approached. "How did they take it?" "Like watching sheep spot a wolf," James replied. "Billy Carson nearly wet himself. Snake-Eye wanted to shoot me, but fear made them hesitate. They're starting to turn on each other already." Alexander nodded slowly. "Good. Let them stew overnight. By morning, they'll be at each other's throats, over the missing horses and gold. Tomorrow we start picking them off, one by one." James thought of the terror in Billy Carson's eyes, the confusion turning to suspicion among the gang members. The McKenna legacy was more than just killing. It was the art of turning predators into prey, of making them destroy themselves before the final blow fell. As father and son melted into the darkness, the sounds of argument drifted from the saloon. The first strike had landed true, not with bullets or blood, but with something far more devastating: fear. The Carson gang's long nightmare was only beginning. Dawn broke over Tucker's Crossing to find the Carson gang already at each other's throats. Marcus Carson stood in the center of the saloon, his scarred face twisted with rage as he confronted his men, the missing horses, the sealed passes, and, most importantly, the growing whispers about hidden gold had done their work through the sleepless night. "Someone's lying," Carson snarled, his hand resting on his gun. His eyes swept across the faces of his gang, searching for signs of treachery. "The money from the Henderson job is light. 300 in gold missing." Sarah's carefully planted rumors had grown into cold, hard facts in the gang's collective mind. Tom Reeves stepped forward, his usual bravado dampened by fear and suspicion. "Maybe you should ask your brother about that." His gaze shifted to Billy Carson, who had spent the night jumping at shadows. "Boy's been awful nervous since yesterday. You watch your mouth!" Marcus took a threatening step toward Reeves, but Snake-Eye Jenkins' voice cut through the tension. "He's right, Marcus. Billy's been acting strange ever since that McKenna fellow showed up." The sharpshooter's good eye narrowed. "Speaking of which, how'd he know to come back? Unless someone here tipped him off." From her hidden perch in the rafters, Sarah McKenna watched the scene unfold with professional satisfaction. She'd spent the night moving through the shadows, whispering different versions of the same story to different gang members. Now, those stories were colliding, creating a web of suspicion that no amount of brotherly loyalty could untangle. Outside, Samuel McKenna's expert tracking had left signs for the gang to find. Horse tracks leading in different directions, some suspiciously, close to the telegraph office. More seeds of doubt, suggesting that someone in the gang was planning to flee, perhaps even contact the law. "Nobody's going anywhere," Carson declared, but his authority was already crumbling. 2 more gang members had disappeared during the night, taking their chances in the mountains rather than face what was coming. The remaining men exchanged uneasy glances, each wondering who would betray them first. James McKenna watched from the hotel window across the street, his father beside him. The morning light caught the silver in Alexander's hair as he studied. The gang's deterioration with cold satisfaction. "Notice how they bunched together," Alexander murmured, "but keep their gun hands free, ready to turn on each other at the first sign of trouble. That's what happens when you build loyalty on fear instead of trust." A commotion erupted in the saloon. Billy Carson had made a break for the door, perhaps hoping to reach the stolen gold that only existed in the gang's paranoid imagination. 3 guns turned on him before he made it halfway. "Where you running to, boy?" Reeves's voice carried through. "The Batwing doors." "Got something to tell us about that missing money?" "I didn't take nothing," Billy's voice cracked with panic. "But I heard what happened to the Hawkins gang up north, how they were found, picked off one by one. Someone's hunting outlaws, Marcus. We need to get out of here." Marcus Carson's backhand sent his brother sprawling. "There's nowhere to run, you fool. The passes are blocked, horses gone. We'd be picked off in the open." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Unless that's what you're counting on. Unless you made some kind of deal." From his position on the roof of the livery stable, Thomas McKenna made final adjustments to his timing charges. The next series of explosions would drive the gang toward the south end of town, right into the killing ground they'd prepared. "Look at them," James said softly, watching the gang fragment before his eyes. All their power, their reputation, gone in a single night. And we haven't even fired a shot." Alexander's cold smile held no mercy. "The best hunters know that the kill is just the final step. First, you isolate your prey, then you make them turn on each other. By the time the actual killing starts, they've already defeated themselves." As if to emphasize his point, gunfire erupted in the saloon. Someone had finally snapped, trust giving way to terror. The sound of breaking glass and splintering wood mixed with shouts and curses as former brothers in arms turned their weapons on each other. "Time to move," Alexander said, checking his guns. "Let them wound each other, thin their own ranks. When they try to run, and they will, we'll be waiting. One by one, they'll learn what it means to raise a hand against a McKenna." The morning sun climbed higher as father and son moved to their positions. In the saloon, the Carson gang continued to tear itself apart, each man a prisoner of the fear and suspicion the McKennas had so carefully cultivated. The real killing hadn't even begun, but the gang was already defeated. They just didn't know it yet. The morning's chaos had settled into an uneasy quiet by midday. 2 of Carson's men lay dead in the saloon, victims of their own paranoid gunplay. 3 more had vanished into the hills, choosing to take their chances with the blocked passes rather than wait for whatever was coming. The remaining 7 huddled in the saloon, jumping at shadows and watching each other with murderous suspicion. Marcus Carson paced like a caged animal, his authority hanging by a thread. His brother Billy nursed a split lip in the corner, while Tom Reeves and Snake-Eye Jenkins positioned themselves on opposite sides of the room, neither willing to turn their back on the other. The other 3 men, Turner, Wade, and Hawkins, clustered near the bar, hands never far from their guns. "Someone's playing us," Carson growled, coming to a stop near the window. "That McKenna boy showing up like that. The missing horses, the explosions. It's all connected. Maybe we should have killed him proper," Reeves muttered, "instead of just roughing him up." From her hidden position across the street, Sarah McKenna's lips curved in a cold smile as she watched through a spyglass. Her whispered rumors had done their work well. Now it was time for the next phase. The first shot came from nowhere, a single rifle crack that shattered a bottle just inches from Carson's head. The gang leader dove for cover as glass and whiskey rained down. Snake-Eye rushed to the window, rifle ready, but the street remained empty. "There!" Turner shouted, pointing to movement on the roof across the way. But when Snake-Eye's shot kicked up shingles, there was nothing there. Samuel McKenna had already shifted positions, moving like a ghost across the rooftops. His next shot would come from an entirely different direction, feeding the gang's growing confusion and fear. "They're toying with us," Billy whispered, his young face pale with terror. "Like cat and mouse." Another shot rang out, this time from the opposite direction. Wade clutched his arm, blood seeping between his fingers. The bullet had only grazed him, but the message was clear. The hunters could kill any time they chose. "Thy be mine tunnels," Carson decided, desperation creeping into his voice. "We can use them to slip out under the town, get past the blocked passes." It was exactly what the McKennas had been waiting for. Thomas's fingers tightened on the detonator as he watched from his concealed position. The charges he'd set would turn the tunnels into a deadly maze. "Move!" Carson ordered, herding his remaining men toward the back door. They made it halfway across the street before the first explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet. Dust billowed from the mine entrance, followed by the rumble of collapsing tunnels. "South!" Reeves shouted. "The south trail's still open." But Sarah's voice drifted through the chaos, seemingly from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Are you sure about that, Tom? Are you sure your friends haven't already made a deal to save themselves?" The gang members turned on each other again, guns drawn. Trust, already fragile, shattered completely. Carson grabbed his brother's arm, dragging him toward the livery stable. Snake-Eye and Reeves moved in opposite directions, while Turner, Wade, and Hawkins broke for the relative safety of the general store. "Perfect," Alexander McKenna murmured from his position on the hotel roof. Let them separate. Easier to hunt them one by one. James watched the gang scatter, remembering their laughter as they'd beaten him. Now that laughter was replaced by terror, their once unshakable confidence reduced to blind panic. The McKenna legacy was proving itself once again, not through brute force, but through the art of turning predators into prey. "Time to start the real hunt," his father said, checking his rifle. "Samuel, take Snake Eye. Sarah, follow Reeves. Thomas, make sure none of them double back toward the mine. James—" Alexander's cold smile promised retribution. "I believe Marcus Carson owes you a horse." As the McKennas moved to their assigned targets, the tension in Tucker's Crossing reached a breaking point. The Carson gang had finally realized the truth. They weren't fighting ordinary men seeking revenge. They were facing something far more deadly, a family of professional hunters who had turned vengeance into an art form. The trap had sprung, and now the killing would begin in earnest. Snake-Eye Jenkins crouched behind a water trough, his prized rifle clutched in trembling hands. Something had changed in Tucker's Crossing. The familiar streets had become a maze of death, every shadow concealing potential doom. His legendary marksmanship meant nothing against an enemy he couldn't see. A pebble clattered across the street. Snake-Eye spun, firing instinctively. The bullet sparked off empty air as Samuel McKenna's quiet chuckle drifted from somewhere behind him. The sharpshooter whirled again, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Fine shooting," Samuel's voice mocked, "but you're burning daylight, and night's coming. You really want to face a McKenna in the dark?" Across town, Tom Reeves wasn't faring any better. He'd barricaded himself in the telegraph office, only to find messages scattered across the operator's desk, copies of telegrams supposedly sent by gang members planning to betray their companions. Sarah's handiwork, though Reeves didn't know. All he knew was that his world was collapsing around him. "Getting nervous, Tom?" Sarah's whisper seemed to come from inside the room. "Carson always said you were the weak link. Wondering if he was right?" Turner, Wade, and Hawkins had taken refuge in the general store, pushing heavy shelves against the windows. Their partnership, forged through years of robbery and murder, was dissolving in a flood of suspicion and fear. Someone had to tell them. "We were coming here," Turner snarled, his gun moving between his former friends. "Someone's been planning this all along." Wade clutched his wounded arm. "Why don't you ask Hawkins? He's the one who wanted to hit the Millbrook Bank, led us right into this trap." A bottle exploded on the shelf above them, Thomas's warning shot, precise and deliberate. The message was clear. Their hiding place wasn't as secure as they thought. Marcus. Carson and his brother Billy had made it to the livery stable only to find their remaining horses gone. Samuel's work again, the animals spirited away in the night to remove any hope of escape. The stable's back wall bore a freshly carved message. "A McKenna pays his debts. We need to run," Billy pleaded, his youth showing through the outlaw facade. "On foot into the hills. It's our only chance." But Marcus knew better. The hills belonged to the hunters now. Every pass, every trail, every potential escape route would be watched. The McKennas hadn't just trapped them in the town. They'd turned the entire territory into a killing ground. James McKenna moved through the growing shadows like a ghost, tracking his chosen prey. The horse they'd stolen from him was tied outside the stable, a final insult he intended to rectify. His father's words echoed in his memory. "Let them feel the noose tighten. Let them understand what's coming." A shot rang out from the north. End of town, Snake Eye's distinctive rifle. The blast was followed by silence, then a strangled scream that cut off abruptly. Samuel had claimed his target. The sound sent Billy Carson into panic. He bolted from the stable despite his brother's grab for his arm. The younger Carson made it 3 steps before Sarah's thrown knife found his shoulder, sending him sprawling. Into the dust, not a killing blow. The McKennas weren't done playing with their prey. "Run all you want," Alexander's voice carried across the town. calm and terrible. Every step takes you closer to your grave. Every hiding place brings you nearer to judgment. This is what happens when you lay hands on a McKenna. In the telegraph office, Reeves finally broke. He burst through the door, gun blazing wildly at Ho. Imagined enemies. Sarah's second knife took him in the thigh, dropping him beside Billy Carson. Two more pieces positioned exactly where the McKennas wanted them. Night was falling over Tucker's Crossing, bringing with it the promise of deeper terrors. The remaining gang members huddled in their chosen refuges, watching the darkness gather, and knowing what it meant. The McKennas owned the night, had owned it since their ancestors first began hunting evil men across these territories. The prey was separated, wounded, and afraid. Now the real hunt would begin. Marcus Carson dragged his wounded brother back into the stable's shadows, his mind racing. Something about the McKenna name had been nagging at him since this nightmare began. A memory from his childhood, a story his father had told him with his dying breath. The McKennas, Billy gasped through the pain of Sarah's knife wound. Father said to never cross them, said there was bad blood. Shut up, Marcus hissed, but the memory was surfacing now. 20 years ago, their father hadn't died of fever, as they'd been told. He'd died running from something he'd refused to name. In the darkness outside, Alexander McKenna's voice carried like a cold wind. Ask your brother, Marcus. Ask him about Joseph Carson's last ride, about the debt that's finally come due. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Joseph Carson, their father, the man who'd built the original Carson gang, who'd ruled these territories through fear and violence until that final night when he'd stumbled home, bleeding and broken. Your father was a thief and a killer, Alexander continued, each word sharp as a blade, but he made his worst mistake when he murdered Claire McKenna, when he left my sister to die in that burning farmhouse while he stole her silver and her horses. Billy's eyes widened with understanding. The silver he buried, the fortune he said would keep us safe. It wasn't just silver, was it? Family heirlooms. James McKenna's voice joined his father's, closer now. McKenna silver, pieces our grandfather brought from the old country, each one marked with our family crest, like the medallion you missed when you took my horse. Marcus remembered the small silver disc they'd ignored, thinking it worthless. Now he understood. It hadn't just been a beating they'd delivered. They'd attacked a McKenna on the anniversary of his aunt's murder, stolen his horse, and missed the very thing that would have warned them of their danger. Your father died slow. Alexander's voice was colder than the gathering night. Begged for mercy at the end, told us everything about the silver, about his sons, about the legacy of violence he'd built. We let him live long enough to know we'd find you someday, that his precious boys would pay the final price for his sins. The truth settled over Marcus like a shroud. This wasn't just about a beating or a stolen horse. This was about blood debts and family honor. The McKennas hadn't stumbled onto their trail. They'd been waiting, watching, choosing their moment for 20 years. We can return it, Billy pleaded into the darkness. The silver, it's buried in the hills. We can show. You, too late for bargains. Sarah's voice drifted down from the rafters. 20 years too late. The silver doesn't matter anymore. This is about justice, about finishing what your father started. Marcus pulled his gun, knowing it was useless but unable to face his fate unarmed. All these years, they'd thought themselves the predators, the strongest force in these territories, but they'd been living on borrowed time, their freedom purchased with their father's lies and their own ignorance. The best part? Alexander's voice held the first hint of emotion, a deep, terrible satisfaction. You'll never know if James crossing your path was chance or design, if you brought this doom on yourselves, or if we finally got tired of waiting. That question will haunt your last moments. In the stable's darkness, Marcus Carson felt the last pieces of his world crumble. They weren't just facing hunters now. They were facing vengeance 20 years in the making, orchestrated by a family that had turned revenge into an art form. The real game was only just beginning. James McKenna stood in the shadow of the hotel, processing the truth about his Aunt Claire's murder. He'd been too young to remember her, only 5 when Joseph Carson's gang had raided her farm. But he'd grown up with her absence, seen the pain in his father's eyes whenever her name was mentioned. "Did you know?" he asked softly as Alexander materialized beside him. "When they attacked me on the trail, did you know it was Carson's sons?" "We suspected," his father replied, checking his guns with practiced precision. "Had been watching them for months, but you crossing their path, that was fate's gift." Alexander's pale eyes found his sons in the darkness. Claire would have, like that, justice coming full circle through her nephew. Across the street, Sarah dropped silently from the stable's roof. Turner and Wade are making a break for it through the general store's back door. Thomas is in position. Inside the stable, Marcus Carson's mind raced through years of memories, rewriting his own history with this new understanding. The strange moves their father had made in his final years, the way he'd insisted they learn to survive in the wilderness. He'd been preparing them for this, knowing the McKennas would come eventually. "We should have killed him," Marcus muttered, pressing a cloth against Billy's wounded shoulder. "That rider on the trail, we should have finished it. Wouldn't have mattered," Billy gasped through clenched teeth. "They've been hunting us all along. Everything we did, every move we made, they were watching, waiting for the right moment." A series of sharp cracks split the night, gunfire from the direction of the general store. Thomas's voice carried clearly in the aftermath. "2 down." Clean shots, both of them. Turner and Wade had made their play and lost. 4 of the original 12 remained. The Carson brothers, Hawkins and Snake-Eye Jenkins, though no one had heard from the sharpshooter since his scream in the growing dark. "You want to know the worst part?" Sarah's whisper seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Your father knew this was coming. In those final moments when we caught him, he understood that everything he'd built, everything he'd stolen and killed for, would die with his sons, that the McKenna blood he spilled would drown his legacy." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. All his life, he'd modeled himself on Joseph Carson's example, ruling through fear, taking what he wanted, believing himself untouchable. Now he understood that his father's legacy wasn't power or violence. It was doom, carefully crafted by the family whose blood he'd spilled. James moved through the shadows toward the stable, his aunt's silver medallion catching the faint starlight. He remembered his father's words from that morning. Some debts can only be paid in blood. The Carson gang's attack on him hadn't started this hunt. It had merely given it perfect symmetry. A son avenging a father's sister, while a father avenged a murdered daughter. "It ends tonight," Alexander's voice carried across the town. 20 years of waiting, 20 years of planning, the debt comes due under these stars. In the stable's darkness, Marcus Carson felt the last of his courage crumble. They weren't just facing death now. They were facing judgment, the kind that had been written in their blood since the day their father decided to raid a McKenna farm. The night grew deeper as the hunters closed in, generations of vengeance carried in their steady hands and cold eyes. The time for games was over. Now came the reckoning. The moon rose over Tucker's Crossing, casting long shadows across the empty streets. In the stable, Marcus Carson had pushed his wounded brother into the hayloft, creating a defensive position that gave them a view of both entrances. Somewhere, in the general store, Hawkins waited alone, his nerve breaking with each passing hour. Snake-Eye Jenkins remained unaccounted for, though the pool of blood they'd found suggested he wouldn't be joining the final fight. Alexander McKenna gathered, his family in the shadow of the hotel. Their weapons gleamed dully in the moonlight as they made their final preparations. Each member checked their ammunition with practiced precision, knowing what was to come. "Time to finish this," Alexander said, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years' patience. "Thomas, seal off their last escape route. Sarah, make sure Hawkins doesn't try anything foolish. Samuel, find high ground. If anyone makes it past us, they're yours." His pale eyes found his son's. "James, you and—" "I have an appointment with the Carson brothers." James checked his recovered Winchester, now back in familiar hands. The bruises on his face had faded to dull aches, but the memory of the Carson gang's laughter still burned fresh. "Together?" "Together." Alexander's hand rested briefly on his son's shoulder. Claire would have wanted it that way. Sarah melted into the shadows, moving toward the general store where Hawkins huddled in growing panic. Thomas headed for the south end of town, his satchel of explosives promising a fiery conclusion to any attempted escape. Samuel, rifle cradled in experienced hands, found his perch atop the saloon's roof. In the stable's hayloft, Billy Carson's whispered voice carried the edge of delirium. "We could still run, Marcus. Into the hills. Father showed us places." "Shut up," Marcus hissed, but his brother's words struck a chord. Their father had indeed shown them hidden trails, secret caves, places he'd claimed would keep them safe. Now, Marcus understood those lessons differently. Joseph Carson hadn't been teaching them survival skills. He'd been trying to give his sons a chance against the vengeance he knew would come. The night air carried the smell of approaching rain, the first storm in weeks gathering over the mountains. Thunder rolled in the distance as James and Alexander moved into position, one taking the stable's front, the other covering the rear. Their movements were synchronized, the product of years hunting together. Inside the general store, Hawkins finally broke. The isolation, the waiting, the knowledge of what stalked him, it proved too much. He burst through the front door, gun blazing wildly at imagined shadows. Sarah's knife found him before he'd taken 3 steps, dropping him to the dirt with mechanical precision. The sound of his fall carried to the stable, where Marcus Carson felt the last threads of his world unraveling. They were alone now, just him and his wounded brother against the full might of the McKenna legacy, 2 sons of a murderer facing judgment for their father's sins and their own. "Marcus Carson." Alexander's voice cut through the night like a blade. "Your men are dead or dying. Your escape routes are sealed. The time for running is over." Thunder cracked overhead. Closer now. The storm was nearly upon them, nature itself gathering to witness the conclusion of this 20-year hunt. Rain began to fall, pattering on the stable's roof like distant gunfire. "You want mercy?" James's voice joined his father's. "Come out now, face what's coming like men, not skulking rats in the dark." But Marcus Carson had not built his reputation on surrender. His gun found his hand as lightning split the sky, illuminating the stable's interior in harsh white light. In that flash, he saw his brother's pale face, the fear in his eyes, and made his decision. "Our father died running," he told Billy, checking his ammunition one final time. "We won't make the same mistake." The storm broke over Tucker's Crossing. As the hunters closed in, thunder rolled across the valley like heaven's own judgment as the McKennas prepared to collect a debt 20 years in the making. The time for waiting was over. The time for blood had come. Lightning illuminated the stable in strobing flashes as rain drummed against the wooden walls. Marcus Carson had positioned himself behind a stack of hay bales, his brother Billy covering the rear entrance from the hayloft above. Every few seconds, thunder shook the building, masking any sounds of the McKenna's approach. "Remember what Father taught us," Marcus called up to his brother. "Watch the shadows. They'll try to draw our fire, make us waste ammunition." But even as he spoke the words, he knew his father's lessons wouldn't save them. Joseph Carson had died, despite all his experience, all his precautions. His sons would fare no better. Outside, James McKenna moved like a ghost through the rain, using the storm's fury as cover. His father's shape was barely visible on the other side of the stable, a darker shadow among shadows. 20 years of hunting together had taught them to read each other's movements without signals or sound. The first shot came from Billy, his nerves finally breaking. The bullet splintered wood near James's head, drawing an answering shot from Alexander that kept the younger Carson pinned down. Marcus returned fire through a gap in the stable wall, but the McKennas had already shifted positions. "Your father died calling for mercy," Alexander's voice carried through the storm, "begging us to spare his sons. We could have hunted you then. 2 boys, barely more than children. But that wouldn't have been justice." "So you waited," Marcus shouted back, trying to track the source of the voice. "Waited until we built something of our own, until we had something to lose, until you became what he was," James added, his words seemingly coming from a different direction. "Until you proved yourselves worthy of his fate." Lightning flashed again, and in that instant, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement at the stable's side window. His gun barked twice, but hit nothing but rain and darkness. The return shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him against the hay. Bales. Alexander McKenna's aim was as lethal as his reputation. Billy's panicked voice carried from above. "Marcus, they're in the rafters!" His gun blazed at shadows, but Sarah McKenna was already moving, her knife finding its mark in his gun hand. Billy's weapon clattered to the stable floor as he clutched his bleeding fingers. The storm reached its peak, rain turning the ground to mud as thunder rolled continuously overhead. Marcus tried to push himself up, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest. His father's final words echoed in his memory. "If the McKennas ever find you, don't waste time fighting. Just run." But there was nowhere left to run. Thomas's explosives had sealed the passes. Samuel waited in the hills with his legendary rifle. The territory itself had become their execution ground, prepared over 20 years of patient planning. "It's over, Marcus." James McKenna emerged from the shadows, his recovered Winchester aimed steady. "Your men are dead. Your brother's finished. Don't make this any harder than it has to be." Alexander appeared from the other side, his pale eyes reflecting the lightning. Sarah dropped silently from the rafters, her knife held ready. The 3 McKennas formed a triangle of death around the fallen gang leader. Marcus Carson looked up at his executioners, finally understanding the true meaning of fear. This wasn't random violence or simple revenge. This was judgment, cold and inevitable as the storm itself. The McKennas hadn't just beaten them, they'd broken them, stripped away their illusions of power and invulnerability. "Our father," Marcus said, his voice barely audible above the rain. Before you killed him, did he tell you why? Why he chose your sister's farm that night?" "Does it matter?" Alexander's gun didn't waver. "Would any answer make her death right? Make your crimes lighter?" Thunder crashed overhead as Marcus Carson prepared to meet his fate. In the hayloft, Billy had gone quiet, accepting the inevitable. The storm raged on, nature's fury matching the violence about to unfold in the rain-soaked stable of Tucker's Crossing. Marcus Carson's last stand began with a desperate gamble. In one fluid motion he rolled behind a support beam, his gun finding the lantern that hung from the stable's central post. The shot rang out, shattering the glass and sending burning oil cascading across the hay-strewn floor. Flames leaped up instantly, turning the rain-soaked stable into an inferno. Like father, like son. Alexander McKenna's voice cut through the roar of fire and storm. Joseph Carson died in flames too, fitting that his boys should follow the same path. The fire spread rapidly, creating a deadly maze of burning hay and falling timber. Billy Carson's scream from the hayloft pierced the chaos as flames reached his position. Marcus tried to shoot toward where he'd last seen James McKenna, but smoke was already filling the stable, turning every shadow into a potential threat. Sarah McKenna moved like a wraith through the flames, her knife finding Billy's leg as he tried to scramble down from his perch. The younger Carson tumbled to the ground, landing hard among the burning. Hey! His gun came up, but Sarah was already gone, disappearing into the smoke like a ghost. "You wanted to know why," Marcus shouted, coughing as he sought better position. "Why our father chose your sister's farm." A bullet from James's Winchester splintered the beam near his head, forcing him back. It wasn't random. She knew something. Something about the silver. Alexander's laugh was colder than the rain outside. "More lies, Marcus? More of your father's desperate attempts to save himself?" Another shot, closer this time. "The silver was just silver. The murders were just greed. Your father was nothing but a common thief who thought himself above consequences." The stables. Roof began to creak ominously as fire ate through the supporting timbers. Through the smoke, Marcus caught glimpses of the McKennas moving with practiced coordination, tightening their circle. They'd done this before, used fire to flush out prey, to force desperate men into fatal mistakes. Billy made a break for the rear door, but James was waiting. The Winchester roared once, and the younger Carson sprawled face first in the mud. Outside, not dead, the McKennas weren't finished with their revenge yet, but no longer a factor in the fight. "Our father wasn't lying," Marcus's voice cracked with desperation. "The silver, it wasn't just family heirlooms. There were papers hidden inside, documents about—" His words cut off as Sarah's knife sliced along his gun arm, nearly making him drop his weapon. "Enough stories," James said, emerging from the smoke like an avenging spirit. "Enough lies. 20 years of waiting ends here." Marcus fired blindly, but the McKennas were already moving. A bullet from Alexander caught him, in the leg, dropping him to one knee. The flames were everywhere now, turning the stable into a vision of hell. Through the inferno, he could see all three McKennas advancing, father, son, and sister, their faces illuminated by the fire that would claim his life. "Wait!" The word tore from his throat. "The papers. They proved something about your family, about why the McKennas really came west. Our father said Alexander's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him into the burning hay. Your father said anything he thought might save his life, made promises, offered secrets, begged for mercy. In the end, none of it mattered, just like it doesn't matter now." The stable's roof began to collapse as Marcus Carson made his final play. His gun came up, aimed not at his attackers, but at the support beam above James McKenna's head. The shot rang out just as Alexander and Sarah fired simultaneously. Marcus's bullet struck true, sending burning timber crashing down, but the McKenna's shots were truer. James rolled clear of the falling beam as Marcus Carson slumped against the burning wall, 3 bullets finding their mark with surgical precision. The gang leader's gun slipped from lifeless fingers as the flames closed in. "Check the brother," Alexander ordered, his voice carrying over the fire's roar. "Make sure he lives long enough to spread the word. The rest of the territory needs to know what happened here." Sarah moved through the rain to where Billy Carson lay weeping in the mud. Her knife touched his throat, just firmly enough to draw blood. "Listen well, boy. You're going to live because we choose to let you live, because someone needs to tell the story of how the McKenna family deals with those who harm their own." Inside the burning stable, James stood over Marcus Carson's body, the recovered Winchester steady in his hands. "For Aunt Claire," he said softly, before putting a final bullet into the gang leader's heart. The storm began to ease as father and son emerged from the inferno. Behind them, the stable collapsed in a shower of sparks and burning timber, becoming a funeral pyre for the last of the Carson gang's leadership. The rain washed blood and soot from their faces as they watched the flames reach toward the lightning-torn sky. "It's done," Alexander said, his pale eyes reflecting the fire. "After 20 years, Claire can rest easy." James nodded, feeling the weight of family legacy in every ache and bruise. What about his last words, about the silver and the papers? Stories, his father replied, but something in his voice made James wonder. Your grandfather brought that. Silver West for a reason, but that's a tale for another time. Tonight was about justice, pure and simple. Sarah emerged from the rain, cleaning her knife with practiced care. Billy Carson will live. I've given him something to remember us by. A scar he'll carry until his dying day. No one who sees it will doubt his story about this night. The three McKennas stood in the rain, watching the stable burn. Behind them, Tucker's Crossing was silent except for the storm's fading fury. The Carson gang was no more, their legacy, ended by the very family they'd wronged 2 decades ago. We should move, Alexander said finally. Samuel and Thomas will want to know it's finished, and there's always more work for hunters like us. As they walked away from the blazing ruins, James felt the familiar calm settling over him. This hunt was over, but others would follow. The McKenna legacy would continue, passed down through generations of those who stood against the darkness that haunted these territories. Behind them, the stable's remains collapsed completely, erasing the last trace of Marcus Carson and his dreams of outlaw glory. The rain continued to fall, washing away blood and memories alike, leaving only legends to mark this night of vengeance and justice in Tucker's Crossing. Dawn broke over Tucker's Crossing, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The storm had passed, leaving behind a cleaned landscape and the smouldering remains of the stable where Marcus Carson had made his last stand. Billy Carson was long gone, limping toward distant towns with a story that would become legend, a warning to any who might consider crossing the McKenna family. The McKennas gathered their horses at the edge of town, checking weapons and supplies with practiced efficiency. Samuel's rifle had returned to its scabbard, Thomas's remaining explosives were carefully packed, and Sarah's knives were cleaned and sheathed. Their work here was done. Claire would be proud, Alexander said softly, his pale eyes surveying the town one last time. Not just of the justice, but of how we handled it. Clean, professional, the way our family has always worked. James mounted his recovered horse, feeling the rightness of being back in his own saddle. The bruises from his beating were fading, but the lessons would remain. Every hunt taught something new, added another layer to the family's considerable knowledge. Where to now? He asked, though he already knew the answer. There were always more outlaws, more evil men who needed to learn the meaning of justice. The McKenna legacy wasn't just about revenge. It was about maintaining order in a land that tried to resist it. North, Alexander replied, swinging into his saddle. Reports of trouble in the Dakota Territory, another gang that thinks itself above consequences. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. They'll learn different soon enough. Sarah and Samuel took the lead, with Thomas bringing up the rear. As they rode away from Tucker's Crossing, James glanced back one final time. The town would recover, would tell stories about the night the McKennas came to collect a 20-year debt. Some of those stories would even be true. You're wondering about what Marcus said, Alexander said as they rode. About the silver and the papers. Was he lying? His father was silent for a long moment, watching the horizon. Every family has its secrets, son, ours more than most. The silver your grandfather brought west, let's just say there are some stories better left for another time. James nodded, understanding. Today was about completion, about honoring Aunt Claire's memory and upholding the family name. Whatever mysteries lay in their past could wait for another dawn. The 6 riders disappeared into the morning mist, leaving Tucker's Crossing to its memories. The legend of the McKenna family would grow with this tale, spreading through territories where lawmen feared to tread. A reminder that justice had many faces and some debts could only be paid in blood. The hunt was over, but somewhere over the horizon, another was about to begin.